So up next, we have a presentation that has become very relevant since 2020, 2021. Any guesses? That's right.
So hybrid and remote working. That is what that 2020 and 2021 has made us all accustomed to. Almost everyone in corporate India has faced it or experienced it, and many offices still function and will continue functioning in the hybrid mode.
That's right, Ayan. And in this context, Interweave has conducted its own all India research on the multifaceted nature of challenges that women face in remote work environments and how these barriers hinder equitable career progression.
What are the factors that shape women's careers in hybrid settings, and how do professional aspirations and remote dynamics work together? And most importantly, how can dissecting these challenges foster dialogue and collaboration to pave the way for actionable strategies that empower women to thrive in hybrid work settings?
So, to shed more light on this, let's please have POTHEN Jacob on stage, partner and principal consultant at Interweave.
Let's please give him a round of applause.
So, good evening. So I'm going to start this entire discussion first posting a question to all of you. I can't see everyone. It's like, I just want to put a question on. Yeah. So, if I were to ask you, requesting or taking advantage of flexible working, what percentage of women would have responded that it impacts their career or impacts their promotion opportunity career? 50 to 60%? Yeah? And if you generalize it, if you have a normalized curve of people with all generation, 60 to 70%? How many of you? Yeah? 70 to 80%, right? Is it 80 to 90%? Yeah? More than 90%? Excuse me. More than 90%, how many of you? Yeah? Okay. So, what if we had some research around it and we knew what women thought about if I ask for flexibility and it impacts my promotion? Would it be nice to know? Right? So now we have a lot of perception which is around, among all of you, which is very varied. Right? Let's see if there is a research that could help us. In 2022, 94% of women felt that if they ask for any kind of flexibility, it will impact their promotion. And it hasn't come down. It's moved up to 97% in 2023. So I just want to set two things in perspective. One, give a context in terms of how relevant this particular topic is. Second, how important is research to understand perceptions and give some validity to some of these perceptions that we have and bring it closer to the reality. And with that data point, we can take better decisions, right? On that note, let me briefly introduce the research. First, the research, the respondent profile of the people that we've looked at. So first of all, it was not a comparative study. It was only women, and women who worked or working in a hybrid or a remote environment or remote workplace, or from a remote. Previous. It's not working. Not forward, backward. Backward. Yeah, it's not working. That's why I was. All right. So it was all women who worked or working in a remote or a hybrid workplace or a work with that flexibility. We had over 1,000 women responding, mostly interviews, not just filling up a survey. We talked to them, we understood their perspectives and asked them to take a quantitative instrument so that we know what they feel and what they think about hybrid and remote working, how it impacts their careers. So we had a very varied kind of, a very nice stratified sample with almost 40% from individual contributors, 20 to 30% from leadership roles and managerial roles. We also made sure that the respondents are distributed across cities so that we know that it's a sample that well represents the workforce that we are looking at, and a good representation of almost 20% from, close to around 20% from multiple industries. There are other segmentation, other factors we looked at, the age, the tenure of people, what's the kind of career aspirations that they have, because we want to know that these are not biased in a particular way because of the respondent profiles that we've chose. Now, we have looked at 8 different factors for our research, goals and performance management, and looking at developmental opportunities, productivity enablers, internal mobility and progression, which is promotions or rewards and recognition, external opportunities, relationship and connect, which basically we talk about networking, right? And working hours. And there are 47 sub-dimensions to it. Now, what I'm going to do is a snapshot of what we've done, right? There are lots of cuts in terms of how we understood this particular research. What I'm going to focus is on what are some of the challenges women face when they're working remote or hybrid, and factors which impact their career, and they feel that it impacts their career, right? Not all these 47 dimensions, but the only relevant ones which are critical to factors that are impacting when they work remote or hybrid. Now, we looked at it in 2 dimensions, 2 perspectives. So I need to explain this a bit. The first dimension is effectiveness of these factors. How does it contribute to their ability or their probability of getting promoted or ability to grow their careers within the organization? The other dimension that we looked at is how important are these factors? So on the bottom line, you can see that importance adds up to 100%. That means it's a factorial analysis that there is a total weightage of 100. How that 100% distributed across these particular factors. For example, external opportunities has got around 17% importance out of 100%, right? Performance and developmental opportunities, both of these had around 18%, each one of these, right? Whereas working hours, which we think that it's a big factor, had only 1% impact, right? Based on the regression factorial analysis that we have done. So it actually takes off from a lot of things that we perceive that working hours is so important. No, it's not really. So that's where I want to actually pitch in this. Data makes a lot of relevance. Data has a lot of relevance to making our decisions and informed decisions. Okay. Now I'm going to we have 5 takeaways from this, and I'm going to take each one of it, and let's go through it one by one. The first one, which we thought was one of the most relevant, or the most importance that women has placed when it comes to career, is 2 different things. One is performance management, goal setting and performance management, and developmental opportunities. Well, it's important, but is it at its best, or among the factors that we looked at, is it at the top end of the spectrum in terms of its effectiveness? No, it's somewhere in the middle. Women feel that there's a lot more can be done with respect to what we are doing for women who are working remotely or hybrid when it comes to performance management and developmental opportunity. There are 5 things that we look at. With performance management, there are 2 factors within performance management. One is the effectiveness with which we actually give or manage the coach people when they are working remotely from a performance perspective, right? And second part is time available for coaching, right? So if I were to look at a few factors when it comes to coaching, is coaching a mechanical process? No, it's not. It's a very involved process. Another factor which we need to take into account is trust is a big factor, right? Between the coachee and the coach, right? It takes time to build that trust. And it takes time to build a relationship that you can actually develop or improve the capabilities of a person over a period of time. So time available from managers to do that coaching is significantly short. That's what the perception of women who are working remotely has responded as. The second factor is, how well are we equipping these managers to do this entire coaching remotely? How much of skill building have we done? In-person coaching itself is challenging. Now you're expecting the managers with no further capability building to do this entire coaching remotely. Could be another factor why women think that, or why people think that when they go remote or hybrid, the coaching effectiveness significantly reduces, right? These 2 factors which had much more significance when it comes to development. I think it's flipped developmental opportunities than when you have it in person in an office or in a work environment. The second factor is basically performance management. It's a thing that labels have flipped. I'm sorry about that. Time available from managers for feedback is something that women feel that they don't get enough when they go hybrid or remote. Right? There are a lot more factors. I've shown there are around 12 factors we looked at, 12 different dimensions we looked at. Now, I want to focus on the other part of it, which is even more critical. How transparent are we when we look at critical assignments? Right? In a goal-setting process, oftentimes it's a very formal process where there is fair amount of transparency what kind of performance objectives are you setting. But when you look at critical assignments, it's more or less an informal process. The assignments come, you allocate that assignments to a few people. And there is a feeling of bias in that. How would you allocate, first of all, how do I know when I'm working remotely, how do I know about these critical assignments which comes up, which is critical for my development and perception about my performance? And how do I locate that is the second challenge that we have. How do I know that I'm not biased, it's fair when it comes to these critical assignments are given to people without any bias of working remote or hybrid? So these 2 factors drive a significant amount of perception among women that there is certain amount of unfairness which exists between when it comes to critical assignments, when it's given to people who are working in office versus working remotely. Now let's move to the second one. The second insight that we have. Transparency and trust in promotion process. Right? We all try to get as much of fairness in the entire process of promotions which are being which as a process within the organization. But there is still a feeling that if I work remotely, my chances of being promoted are lesser. And I'm talking about, we may know it intuitively that this could be happening in organization, but there is validation of that. Right? Second thing is, the transparency in the promotion process itself. Can I explain to a person who is working remote or hybrid why that person was not considered for a promotion, and what could be the reasons why that person was not considered? The overall transparency in which the whole process happens, they have doubts about how objective those processes have been, how objective those decision making have been. So that's the second element of it. Now the third element is, as much as we say that no, we are open to working from home, working from anywhere, relocation comes as a barrier. Even today, women feel that when you're considered being for a role within the organization, and if you're working remote and hybrid, relocation is still a challenge. We still talk about, no, you need to be at this particular location to do this job. So that perception that no, our belief or our wanting to believe that relocation has gone away, that particular barrier is reduced, is still there. It's as much as a challenge. Women feel that even today, if you were to be considered for a job, you need to be willing to relocate and work from anywhere. It's not really a reality when it comes to decisions being taken for job or opportunities within the organization. Now let's move to the third insight. Well, we talked about a lot of things about performance management, right? There are a lot of things going good about it. One of the things which we talked about is perception about productivity. It is very extremely positive. The one which has got the highest amount of effect from an effectiveness perspective, the most effective when it comes to how managers give the perception out that it's very fair, right? The productivity is assessed very fairly. But if you're working remotely, does it translate into pay decisions which is fair? They don't think so. This reward has been the lowest in terms of effectiveness if you were to look at it from a remote or a hybrid working perspective. How you're rewarded when you're in person in the organization for the same contribution versus how you're rewarded when you're working remotely for the same contribution that you would have made, right? Now, there are two elements to it. One is distributive, one is procedural, from the fairness perspective. The procedural one is a process of how you make decisions without having biases because you're working remotely or you're working hybrid, right? The second part is distributive. Distributive is the amount of reward or pay increases that you would have got. Both are a challenge when it comes to working remote. And the perception is that if you're working remote or working hybrid, you will have an impact on the pay increases what you get because the process itself is flawed, the process itself is biased, and the decision also have certain inbuilt biases in terms of the amount of increases that you would get, right? Let me move to the fourth one. The fourth one is about networking and collaboration. I would generalize the entire 3 points as remote access, right? And the first one is to access to support groups. So we all set up ERGs, right? But if you're working remotely, the accessibility to the support groups are not viewed as positive. You need to start looking at how these support groups are designed in a way that, irrespective of where you're working from, it's accessible to people who need it. And that's the perception that people have and women have when they work remotely. I know that my organization have a support group supporting women, but how accessible is it when I work remotely or when I work hybrid? That also poses another question. Do we need to have a resource group for people who are working remotely and working hybrid, right? The challenges that community faces is very similar, right? Do we need to think about a support group which particularly focuses on the challenges of people who work remotely or work hybrid, right? The second one is about collaboration, availability of team members when they want to collaborate. And we all know that a lot of collaboration happens informally. It may not be the formal meeting collaboration that they are reflecting on when they would have responded to this particular question. It's about the informal settings that we collaborate on. As we walk across the hallway, we talk to a person and say, okay, hey, I got this particular challenge and I'm going to come up with some of the ideas. What's your reflection on that? It never happens. And how much of that is encouraged in the organization? It's required. I mean, informal organization is part of every single organization, but how do you leverage that in a hybrid and a remote work setting as well. And what can we do in order to facilitate some of these things? I mean, there are a lot of collaborative technologies available, but how much of this that's encouraging that, no, have an informal chat? Or how are we actually taking the culture of an organization, respond to an informal chat, right? And one of the people I've talking to this, like, today's world, I send a chat, and when the chat response comes, is the response I get, right? How are we creating a sense of responsibility in among team members? Even an informal chat is as important as a formal meeting, right? So which actually enables the entire organization to give make the women who work remotely feel that I'm as important as a person who is in the organization, right? And lastly, opportunities to build relationships, and we've talked about it, many places that we talked about it, how challenging it is when you're working remotely to build relationship within the organization. It's been talked about, but the other two are very critical, which is in some ways new to me when I was looking at it from what could be challenges that they would have had if you're working remotely. And lastly, working hours. In fact, one of the questions we asked was, is it difficult for you to balance work when you're working remotely? The answer was absolutely no. It's not difficult at all, because I have my flexibility to manage my work. But what makes it difficult is the unpredictability of the formal engagements I need to have. It's a spillover of the formal engagement after my work hours. If my work is getting over at 7 o'clock, or if I have an understanding that I have an extended day till 7:30, how often I'm needed beyond 7:30, right? How often am I called into something, or I'm asked to be part of a particular engagement? How predictable is that? Or am I going to be told, like, in 15 minutes we have a call? Then my flexibility goes away. That's what's challenging. The other part is the housework, which organizations may not be able to do a lot about it, but it is a challenge among women who work remotely. The other aspect which I want to bring in is about productivity enablers. And we looked at, one of the most positive aspects of the entire thing that we had with all the technology being implemented during the work from home or induced work from home during COVID times is that the technology that was available for people to collaborate, the productivity. But one aspect of overall productivity is still lagging behind. It's the effectiveness of decision making. Because decision making is not a very mechanical process. It's a lot of influencing which happens. There is a lot of informal discussion which goes on before you actually get a decision made. And that's where I think there is a feeling among women that if you're working remotely, though the ability to influence decisions and decision makers becomes a challenge, and the effectiveness of decision making, both in terms of speed and the quality or the decisions that you want to be made, it's a challenge, which is something which we need to look at, how these decision making can be improved. Even when I'm working remote, when a woman is working remotely or hybrid, how the decision process can be further enhanced in terms of the process of decision making and how it can be made better. I'm going to stop here. I've got one more slide which is basically connecting all these things, but I'm going to stop here because that's primarily the research was. It's much more detailed. We will be coming out with a full research paper on this, which we'll be distributing and we'll be circulating it for further discussion. The objective of this is to start a conversation and a dialogue. How can we make it more effective make it less impacted for women who work remotely or working hybrid. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, POTHEN. I know we cut you short. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, or we won't be able to complete our sessions. So.